all of those gathered on the Harvard Divinity School campus here. And joining us, we want you to know also this is a live webcast of this event on the HDS website. Again, I'm Sam Nixon, chairperson of the Alumnae Council for this year, and I'm pleased to be here with you on this very happy occasion. To those of you in the barn room with us, I hope that you're enjoying your lunch, and please continue to do so as our program begins. To the alumni and friends of HDS who are watching us online, well, let me assure you that lunch was delicious. But the conversation we're about to have is sure to be just as rich. We now begin our third installment of a truly exciting, distinguished alumni speaker series hosted by the Council this year. Our goal in creating these, what we call Divinity Dialogues, was to give our incredible alumni an opportunity to share their personal and vocational stories with us. As graduates, we know the importance of stories to our life together here at HDS, of our individual stories and how those stories weave together to make our communal story. Today we will hear from the inaugural group of alumni to receive the Gomes honors. Each will tell us briefly about his or her journey and how his or her HDS education has been a guide along the way. These four incredibly accomplished individuals could each tell us so much, and sadly, I say sadly, you all, we'll only have time for a few minutes of reflection from each of them. Sounds like they tell us when we're preaching a sermon sometime. But we're glad for that and for what we will be able to experience even in this short time. And Julia Whitcavitch-DeVoy, our vice chair, will co-moderate the discussion with us there. Let's begin with Reza Aslan. Reza, in your own way, you can, from the mic there.
Great. Thank you, Sam.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone. It is a great honor to be here. I just very quickly want to say, you know, as every HDS alum will tell you, that one of the highlights of the experience at the Divinity School is tea at Peter Gomes's, afternoon tea at Peter Gomes's house. And I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I'd heard about it from previous graduates, and my first time, my friends and I went to Reverend Gomes's house, and we'd gotten there a little bit early, and there was nobody around, and so you know, we thought, let's explore. So we started going through this magnificent house that he lived in that looks like a museum, and we're going through the rooms, and we walk into this beautiful den-like office with this gorgeous desk and this wonderful leather seat, and we're just being really ridiculous and going through drawers and looking at everything. I mean, we really feel like it's a hands-on museum as far as it didn't occur to us that people actually lived in this house. And so I plop myself on the chair and start, you know, touching everything, and then all of a sudden I hear this deep baritone in that peculiar accent that's impossible to actually locate. I hear, "You're in my chair, son." And that was the first time I met Peter Gomes, and he was just a wonderful mentor for my entire time here. Very quickly, to just share a little bit about my journey and what I learned at the Divinity School and how I've used that in my life. You know, somebody said earlier on about the fact that the Divinity School is, you know, where I think it was Peter Gomes actually, yes, in the reading that was read earlier about the lack of faith at the Harvard Divinity School. The big joke being is that this is where faith goes to die. And whether that's true or not, what is really fascinating about my experience here is this sudden realization that has really affected my personal life, my work, my teaching, that religion, particularly, you know, as it's kind of understood here at HDS, is far more a matter of identity than it is a matter of faith. And so one could talk about whether there is a lack of faith amongst individuals here, but what I discovered was an incredibly strong sense of identity that encompassed the customs, practices, and traditions, and even beliefs of the individual faith systems, the plurality of faith systems that makes HDS what it is. And that's really what kind of gave birth to my career. So I walk a fine line between both academia and sort of the popular world. I do a lot of media commentary. I work at the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm very interested in teaching individuals, but also policy and policymakers, agenda setters, the importance of being literate in religion, because if you want to understand other people, other cultures, other nations, other governments, you really have to understand their identities. And to understand their identities, you need to understand their faith, their religious traditions. And that's allowed me, I think, to really blossom in the career path that I've chosen. But it really would not have been, if it weren't for the experience that I had at the Divinity School and the people that I met here, I don't think that fundamental truth would have ever sunk in the way that it did. And it's something that I'm truly, truly grateful for. And I'm absolutely honored to be part of this inaugural class, being awarded this amazing honor of walking in the footsteps of someone like Peter Gomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And it's good to have that insight into your meeting of Peter that way. We'll next hear from Susanna Heschel in her own way. Your story. Thank you.
Thank you. I first came to Harvard Divinity School because I came to talk to G. Ernest Wright. Remember him? I was interested in going into biblical studies. And he suggested that I come here for an MTS. And in fact, I now teach at Dartmouth College, and we always send our students here because I don't think it's possible to go on for doctoral work. In fact, one of my students is here right now, Clayton McClintock. We can't do doctoral work in religious studies without coming first to Harvard Divinity School and receiving that grounding. I couldn't have done it. It was an extraordinary intellectual feast for me. I learned a great deal, and I also learned how to think about certain problems. I learned that I didn't want to go into biblical studies. I was more interested in the history of biblical scholarship and why scholars conceptualize the Bible the way they do. Why do they formulate certain kinds of scholarly questions and examine certain issues, etc. That was what became of interest to me, and so that meant studying the 19th century. And I had the wonderful opportunity of taking classes with George Rupp, with Gordon Kaufman, and with Krister Stendahl, of course. And I just have to say, Krister Stendahl was amazing. He was an amazing teacher in New Testament, as everybody knows. But it was also interesting to me to go back to the dorm. I lived in Divinity Hall, remember? It was so wonderful. I had a big room with a fireplace and working on something. But the students would gather, and there were students from parts of the country. I'd never met students from Mississippi and from Alabama and Kentucky. We had great conversations, but I also came to realize that what Krister Stendahl lectured about in the classroom was not always getting through to the students. They heard him in a different way than I did. And that was very interesting to me, and I used to talk to him about it, to Professor Stendahl about it, Dean Stendahl. There were also great opportunities because of the Boston Theological Institute. So I have to tell you, I was able to go to Boston University and take a seminar with a visiting professor there who was Gershom Scholem. That was amazing. I took a class with Nachum Glatzer in modern Jewish thought, and Glatzer himself had known Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig, so you can imagine what that meant. I took a class with Mary Daly at Boston College. And I have to tell you, just after I arrived here at the Divinity School, I went into the bookstore, and there was the book Beyond God the Father. And I remember vividly taking it home and reading it all at once, and it changed my life. And there were so many moments like that when I learned about thinkers, books, ideas, conversations with people that were extraordinary. We had a little chamber music group in the lounge at Divinity Hall. We used to play trios and quartets. That was great. I used to play the cello. No more. I had to give it up for a dissertation.
Sacrifice.
I also came to appreciate so much the richness of 19th century Protestant thought and biblical scholarship. And what interested me then was looking at 19th century Jewish thought, German Jewish thought, through that lens, and seeing how in many ways Jewish scholars at that time were responding to Christian scholarship and were influenced by it. When I came to formulate my doctoral interest, and I did my PhD at University of Pennsylvania, I told everyone I wanted to write now not about Christian views of Judaism, but about Jewish views of Christianity. And at the time, people's jaws dropped. Really, what an unusual topic. Jewish views of Christianity. So, but I learned so much from this experience and from ways of thinking about the relationship between Judaism and Christianity and why Jewish thinkers formulated aspects of Judaism the way they did in the modern period, how we're heirs to that tradition as well. I finally just want to say that at that time there was so much going on in terms of feminist work, and that also changed my way of thinking. I came to understand Jewish experience in ways that are parallel to women's experience, that is, how Jews in the 19th century finally able, Jewish men anyway, to enter the universities. Women, it came later. But they're able to enter the university and they had to cope with a Christian environment. How could they function? What did they do? How did they contribute? How did they engage in that university discourse? And so it was similar for me, I realized, as a woman and as a feminist coming into what was a male world of theology. And so from feminist theory, I went to post-colonial theory, and that helped me conceptualize things in a different way. And that's what I want to emphasize. I think at the Divinity School, there's so many different ways of thinking about things here, so many different kinds of approaches and teachers, that we learn to think in more complex fashion. And that's what I appreciate so much. Peter Gomes, of course, was a wonderful inspiration, somebody I held in great esteem and awe, in fact, and I miss him very much, as we all do. He was a great figure here who did something very different for the meaning of religion, the meaning of preaching, and meaning of intellectual life as well. I admire him, and I admire all that he did. I felt that he elevated us as scholars of religion and as people of faith, and I'm grateful for that. And I appreciate so much my years here, and I thank you for this very great honor and for the chance to speak to you.
Thank you, Susanna. I would now like to introduce the Honorable Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi.
Well, I'm delighted to be back here in this room after almost a gap of 10 years, I believe. We all have some story about Reverend Gomes. My first encounter with him was right here outside the yard. I had decided that I would attend the Divinity School in my robes. And I didn't know who this man was, and he approached me. He was wearing a very wonderful black suit, and he said, "You have the same regal sense of fashion as I."
I can see him saying.
I can too.
And for those of you who know Peter, during most important events from that time onwards, either at Harvard or at MIT, where he was a frequent visitor, whenever the high times would come, he would actually wear burgundy, and there would be at least 2 men in burgundy on stage sharing platform. And we had a wonderful welcome at Harvard. Of course, Gomes was sort of a very good brand ambassador for Divinity School, welcoming young kids. The following day of my orientation, actually we were in this room, and then I happened to go in the middle of the day to the admissions office, and I saw everybody in tears, and this was the advent of 9/11. The planes had just hit some of the buildings. I hadn't anticipated that as the beginning of my time at Harvard Divinity or my studies here. But it did change quite a bit of what I wanted to study and what I wanted to do with religious studies itself. I grew up in India in a multi-religious society. I had seen religious conflicts face to face, and did have some interest in contributing to some aspect of resolving them. I found wonderful source of refuge in the Building Across Center for the Study of World Religions, where I ended up spending quite a bit of time with then the director, Larry Sullivan. And it was after 6 months being at Harvard that one morning I woke up and I had an email in my inbox, and it said, the president and I have heard of you. Would you come and care to have a cup of tea with us? And it was signed by one of the deans at MIT. I thought the email was as good as a wonderful, generous Nigerian man offering me $1 million. But since there was a local telephone number and wouldn't have cost me much, I decided to make the call. And the email was genuine. And since then, I have been at MIT. And my time there has been most wonderful. At present, I run a center that I founded, Center for Ethics and Transformative Values, with the help of 6 Nobel Peace Laureates who serve as the founding members. And one of them, I had the wonderful opportunity, of course, to study all my life with, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And another one I actually met here in Andover Hall, and this was courtesy of the Boston Theological Consortium. I have a bit of time, so I'll tell you the story. I was, oftentimes as students, you're trying to find a place for quietude, and an individual such as myself who made an early career decision at the age of 10 to live a religious life. I used to go across to the river, and there's the Cowley Fathers of the Episcopal Monastery. And one morning I was there for meditation, and I looked to my right, and there's a familiar-looking face in tracksuit. We spend about an hour in silence, and then we walk out, and I say, your face looks familiar. Turned out to be Archbishop Tutu. And then he told me that he was on sabbatical here at EDS, and that he was teaching for 6 months. And so I explored how I could take classes with him, and it turned out to be a wonderful relationship. I just attended his 81st birthday in Cape Town in South Africa this past year. So it wasn't just about the studies at Harvard, it was also about the kinds of people you met, the colleagues you had, and the relationships you developed. And of course, this was the best party school on campus. One year I had the opportunity to speak to some incoming students, and I said, if that's the way you're going to decide which school you go to, there is something that we can introduce you to, which is divine intoxication. That's a good one. And you'll always be buzzed. It's a privilege, I'm delighted, and thank you for this most wonderful honor.
Thank you, Venerable Tenzin. And now, Sarah Sentilles.
Hi, thank you so much. I actually wrote mine out. That's what happens when you study for too long. You have to write everything down. I came to Harvard Divinity School from Compton, California, a city in south central Los Angeles where I'd been teaching elementary school. There I encountered systemic racism and institutional poverty and my complicity in these interlocking systems of oppression. My privilege became visible to me. I could see that I benefited from the very system that was harming my students. I was attending an Episcopal church at the time, All Saints Pasadena, and my experience there showed me churches could help fight racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, and greed. I came to Harvard to become an Episcopal priest. I walked off the priest path almost immediately upon arrival, although it took me several years, a job at a church, and entering the ordination process, and writing a book called Breaking Up God to admit this. I now call myself agnostic. I'm writing a novel, and I teach critical theory, ethics, and aesthetics to artists at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon. But preparing for this panel discussion, I realized there really isn't that much distance between priest and novelist, or between theologian and artist. I learned here that both religion and art are meaning-making practices with material effects, effects that must be evaluated ethically. Words and images are world-making. They matter. When I was a student here, I was taught to ask a number of questions, but 3 of them continue to guide me and shape my life and work. The first question is this: what's at stake and for whom? Professor Karen King asked this question in all of the classes I took with her. She was teaching me how to read, teaching me to see that texts are inflected with and infected by biases, that they benefit some and harm others, that they are interested. I learned this from Elizabeth Chusler Fiorenza too, though she asked the question differently. What do texts do to those who submit to their vision? David Lamberth too asked a version of this question in his theology classes. What's the cash value, he asked at the end of each class. These professors began my investigation into the roles religious language, images, and practices play in oppression, violence, social transformation, and justice movements. Karen King said to me once, "We live our lives as if the way we think about the world is the way the world is. Therefore, how we think about things makes all the difference." That's exactly why I love to teach. The second question is this: how does God function, or what can you imagine? The late theologian Gordon Kaufman was one of my primary teachers while I was here. And when people asked him whether or not God exists, he always told them they were asking the wrong question. The existence of God is not a question human beings can answer, he said, but the word God is out there in the world doing all sorts of work. That is where he put his attention. What interested him was how God language functions in the world. What work do your beliefs do? Whom do they affect? How? Kaufman took God's mystery seriously. If God is transcendent, if there is more to God than anything human beings can say about God, then words about God necessarily fall short and must be subjected to ongoing critical evaluation. For Kaufman and for me, theology is an act of imaginative construction. God is an imaginative construction, what Kaufman called serendipitous creativity, and the theologian is an artist. But the theologian does not hang her art on the wall to be looked at, Kaufman said. She makes worlds to be lived in. Kaufman sparked my interest in imagination and its effects, and the Office of Ministerial Studies, which at the time was Dudley Rose, Stephanie Paulsell, and Claudia Heibaugh, supported my imagination, granting me permission and funding to pursue creative projects to fulfill field education requirements. I always felt like it was a coup, kind of like I was cheating in some way. I painted, wrote new liturgies, collaborated with the poet Katie Ford, and wrote the manuscript for my first book. I can hear Kaufman speaking to me still. What kind of world will you help bring into being? The third question, who are you, or the construction of otherness and ethics at the limit? Theology is, for me, about the construction of an other, arguably the most other. Theology exists at the limit of what we can know, and I don't mean limit as in theology requires a leap of faith. For me, there is nowhere to leap, nowhere to go, but right here. The challenge is to keep standing on the edge and holding one another accountable. I was preparing to write a dissertation about philosophical and theological understandings of imagination when the photographs of torture taken at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq were published in the paper. And I knew the images had something to do with me, something to do with Christianity. I knew I had to write about those images and about torture. Torture is about turning the other into whom or what you need him to be. It is a kind of ventriloquism, using violence and pain to make others speak the words you need them to say. It seems to me mystery might be the opposite of interrogation. I'm interested in constructing ethics at the limit, the kind of ethical systems explored by thinkers like Emmanuel Levinas and Judith Butler. Their version of ethics emerges not at the place where we know each other, but at places where we do not know one another, where there is more to you than I can ever know, where I encounter the limits of my knowing, the limits of my ability to understand. I think this is the opposite of interrogation, and it is also the opposite of a drone attack, which is what I am writing about now. Drones, seemingly omniscient and omnipotent camera planes flying high above, meting out death and judgment based on images, strike me as utterly theological, and they demand a religious response. The rise of drones has made me more convinced than ever that teaching in an art school is the right place for me to be. The images we make and the way we interpret images matter. Just think of so-called signature strikes, during which a person in a room in Las Vegas uses a camera to determine who will die and who will live based on how someone moves or what a person is wearing or where a person lives. It matters how we look at art, at images, at our constructions of God, at each other, at the other. Images can be used to save, and images can be used to kill. whether those images are theological constructions or misleading photographs interpreted to start a war, or pictures taken by cameras and drones. In one of the last classes I took with Gordon Kaufman, one of the other students was getting frustrated. I think it was another student, but it might have been me, but I'm just gonna pretend it was somebody else. with what he took to be Kaufman's relativism. How can I act, this student wanted to know, if I might always be wrong? Kaufman said this: just because you might be wrong doesn't mean you can't stake your life on what you believe, but it does mean you can't kill anyone else. Kaufman was a conscientious objector in World War II. I'm now writing a novel about a conscientious objector in World War II, and a veteran back from Iraq, and an art teacher. In a way, it is a theological book. It's about the transformative power of art, it's about what it takes to say no, and it's about what it takes to make something new. I think essential to the task of both the theologian and the artist is to create mystery, to unsettle, to question, to trouble, and to stand in that place of uncertainty and imagine a more just and life-giving world, and then to begin the hard, creative, collaborative work of helping bring that world into being. That is what a theological education, at its best, prepares people to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you to all of our honorees. You had fascinating and moving reflections. And we are so delighted as a council, as an alumni community, and as a school community to honor you here today. And to Beth, Sarah, and Laura, HDS was so lucky to have the scholarship, the leadership, and the friendship of your husband and father for so very long. May we please recognize all 5 Gomes honorees with a round of applause now. Wow. Before we close, I'd like to thank Sam and my fellow members of the Alumnae Council for their dedicated work together this past year. We have a tremendous council, and it's been a pleasure to work with all of them. On this occasion, I'd also like to give special thanks to members who are finishing their terms at the end of this academic year. And when I call your name, if you would please come forward. Richie Butler. Sabrina Knox-Clary. Kesali Asamu. And Michael Wolf, our student representative. One more way to go. Finally, our thanks must go to really an exceptional leader, Sam Nixon. Sam has been highly involved with our alumni activities and council for more than a decade. He is a generous man with his time. He is dedicated to this school, and he's a true advocate for HDS here and in our global world. Sam, please come forward. Sam is forward.
Surprising.
Thank you to everyone. We've had a lot of fun with the program, but I am aware that folks might want to finish up conversation and eating, and that there are some other folks in the room who will be moving on to do some business. So a quick reminder, our Dean's Council, your meeting begins at 2:30 and is in the Braun Room, so you're home. It's been moved. You're in the Rabinovitz room. And members of the Alumni Council, our meeting will begin at 2:30 over in the Center for the Study of World Religions in the Directors Conference Room. Congratulations again to all the honorees, and thanks to everyone here for attending. Thank you.